Ruby.
Hi, so this topic is one that's near and dear to my heart, and it's the topic of dog problems and people problems. Who's to blame? And you and I read a lot of dog training lists where a lot of even dog trainers really attribute blame to an owner of a dog who has anxiety or fear or aggression.
And sometimes the dog does too.
um, to the owner, and it upsets us both to read it,
Indeed,
and
yeah.
for a number of reasons. But you have some particular reasons.
Oh, I do. Well, so first of all, I mean, we we see a lot of stuff that's in groups that's only for professional trainers. We see the same stuff out in the general public, but even more so in those things. And it just breaks my heart how harsh and rude so many of the trainers are in talking about the clients of the dog that they're working with. And often have a very harsh view of the dog too, I must say. That's not an uncommon thing. And this, by the way, is very true on both sides of the trainer spectrum, in purely positive groups,
Yes.
as well as, balance groups, whatever
Well,
you
it's
want to call
funny. Even yesterday, I was reading something and I read it to you, and I said, "Wait a minute! This from a balanced trainer is the mirror image of what we would hear from a purely
yeah,
positive
it was just
trainer."
another explanation. So on the purely positive side, we very, very often hear trainers, instead of talking about how to fix the dog, talk about that the dog's a bad match for the home and the dog has to be given up, or the dog has to be euthanized, or whatever. Um, and of course, one of the real claims that the balance community makes is that they rarely would view dogs that way, that they solve problems that purely positive trainers don't at all. And a lot of times they're right. They're willing to work with much more challenging cases in general and whatnot. But yeah, this particular person was talking about solving resource guarding, and really solving it from not what he was labeling as, but basically what he was describing as pretty much a dominance and obedience perspective, and that the owner had to get the right relationship with the dog and all. And of course, our perspective was, well, how does that help anybody else the dog might resource guard
Right,
against, whether it's kids, whether it's older people, guests in the house, whatever. And basically what he ended up saying is, well, if the situation was too challenging, you just really have to have a heart to heart talk about that the dog might need to be rehomed and might need to be euthanized. And we were like, that's the same thing that they're saying
On the other side.
the purely positive people would do. And I think the big difference in that, the purely positive people have a much lower risk level, a risk tolerance than the balanced people. And in part because of how the different sides work. But in any case, that was driving us a bit nuts. And a lot of the responses to that thread involve things about how, well, the people just need to get serious and they need to buckle down, and basically they probably created this problem anyway by being overly permissive with the dog, etc., etc., which I'm not saying could never happen, but it's just very generally not the case. But what really bothers me at the core of it, I guess, as my first thing, is that these people are paying us to help them and their dog, right? They have reached out. They're willing to spend at least hundreds, and in many cases thousands of dollars to get help for their dog. And first of all, just the fact they're willing to do that means, like, they're way better than average owners.
Oh yeah. So I'll just flat out say that when I was in rescue, an owner that is willing to continue to search for an answer and spend money on it and find the right trainer.
It's not the most common thing.
I mean, it is not. And these are the people that you go to bed praying for at night, for every
I
single
hope something
dog
works
that
out
you
for 'em, right?
rescue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is upsetting to hear.
Well, it is. And the other thing is, it kind of reminds me, many years ago when I was younger, I used to sell cars, and of course everybody hates car salesmen and whatnot. And I did quite well, and I made quite a bit of money. And part of the reason was that I had a great deal of respect for how difficult it was for people to be out buying a car. It was, something everybody says they hate, everybody says they're afraid of. And for good reason. The dealers are out to just rack them for as much money as they possibly can. That's what you're there for and all. And most people only buy a car once every 4 years, every 5 years, something like that. Next to their house, it's the biggest purchase they make. And you would have other salesmen all the time, salespeople, we had women too, who just talking about what idiots these people were, how stupid they were, etc., etc. And I used to say to them, you ought to thank God they don't know as much as you know about buying a car. That's part of why you make so much money off of them, you know? And I didn't really like that, and I didn't think you had to make all the money in the world off of every person who came in to buy a car. And I typically sold 3 times as many cars in a month as the other salespeople. But I think that it really had to do with, I respected the fact that these people in a difficult and awkward situation, on the one hand they're excited, it's nice to get a new car, you know. Especially I sold some nice cars that people would be very excited about getting. But everybody was worried and afraid of it. But, you know, these people, if they knew how to solve their dog problem, they wouldn't need us.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it makes me laugh because there are times where I hear you talking to a client and the client's like, well, I've tried everything. And you're like, God, I hope you didn't try everything.
You better hope you haven't tried everything, right? Because, I mean, if you have, what am I going to do for you, right?
Exactly. And inevitably they haven't tried everything.
No.
Which is really cool that we're able to share other new things with them.
Oh, yeah, especially, I mean, we work with a lot of people that have been to at
2,
least
3.
2, usually very often 3 or 4 trainers.
You are rarely the first trainer to walk in the house. Rarely.
Yeah, almost never.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if they actually had tried everything, I mean, the only other hope, which is often true, is that they have tried some things that could work, but they've not been educated well
on
how to do them well enough. And so that could help. But I mean, geez, yeah, if they've tried everything, you know, what are you going to do? But, you know, I think the big thing is, I mean, who wants to pay a plumber or an electrician to come tell you that you're an idiot because of what you do with your plumbing or your electricity?
Right.
It's not your profession. It's not what you do. And you've reached out to that person to pay them money to help you, you know?
And I think it's also worth saying that there are plenty of trainers who know neither how to deal with aggression issues or how to deal with anxiety issues. And so if a professional doesn't know how to tackle some of the harder issues, how can we expect regular pet owners?
Well, how many professionals do we see? I mean, we travel around the country teaching professionals, right? How many professionals do we see that don't have a good answer for their own dog and make excuses for the behavior of their own dog, and often much less difficult than what a lot of our clients are calling us about and asking about. So that's another area of absurdity, and frankly, I mean, there's a lot of people in dog training that just don't have a really good, strong foundational training in animal behavior and learning and whatnot. They've kind of learned from some people who have their own very set ideas of what to do with a dog and whatnot that aren't really based on any great facts. You know, it's just crap that somebody's been doing. And a lot of the training that gets done is, you hear me talk about in the seminars, 50% solutions.
Right.
You know, trainers will say, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? You know, well, don't try, do, right? I mean, we have programmatic responses that work for all dogs. But just the fact that that's how they're talking about it, and legitimately so, that they've tried, you know, the trainers are saying they've tried all these different things often and it's not working with the dog. Well, how do you expect the owner to be any better than you are?
Right.
You know? Right. And if you have things that, you know, you're kind of throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks, you know, it can't all be the owner's fault. But in any case, I think that the first number one thing is that as a profession and as professionals, we need to respect the people who are reaching out to us for help, and particularly respect not just that they're paying us, but that the position they're in. Yeah. That they're frustrated, they're having difficulty. Maybe this dog is, you know, their daughter's dream pet that they got for them, and it's tearing up the house, and it's doing all kinds of stuff, maybe even biting the daughter or something, you know?
Right. Well, and people have lots of hopes and dreams about the dog they bring home, and you've certainly had clients who will cry at the appointment, talking about their frustrations and their difficulties.
Or cry at the changes they see.
Or cry at the changes, actually. That's actually more common.
Well, it's sequential. One comes before the other, you know? Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. So anyway, I think we have to respect that even if we're the first person these people have called, they had to go through some difficulty to say, hey, why don't we take another $100 or a couple $100 a week or something and take a couple hours out of our week and pay somebody to come in and teach us about this. Obviously, we don't know how to solve this issue. So, I mean, that right there really puts anybody who's doing that at the cream of the crop of pet owners.
Oh, yeah.
And they should be respected no matter what it is. But the other thing is, you know, almost everybody I work with a problem dog who's telling me, oh, I know I'm the problem, I know it's my fault and whatnot because other trainers have told me it is, or my aunts and uncles have told me you're just not being tough enough with that dog, you know, whatever it might be. Or some trainers told me I'm being too tough with it. That happens, and that can be true. But almost all of those people have had many other dogs, and they haven't had these problems with the other dogs.
Right.
So first of all, what's the likelihood they created it? Because if they created it, they stink at it because they didn't create it with the other dogs, right?
At least be consistent.
Yeah,
Screw them all up.
Yeah, so they're not that good at creating the problem, right? But, you know, I mean, like, I'm working with a woman with a Schnauzer right now who has some difficulties, none of them too huge. Actually really, really low on the scale of what I deal with, so it's kind of entertaining. But I think this is like her 11th or 12th Schnauzer. She's gone to some training classes, group training classes with dogs before because she thought that, you know, that's what good dog owners do and all. But she never had any of the problems that she's had with this dog. And she's a special ed teacher, so she feels like, well, I should know how to fix all this and all. And yet, while she understands some of the principles of some of the stuff that I'm talking about, she would never come up with the solutions we use on her own and whatnot. And it's funny, it really took like to the third session for her to kind of start being like, okay, all right, so I'm all right. I'm not a bad person because of this and whatnot. And you know, the other thing that goes along with this that I think is so unfortunate is that in parallel, trainers tend to put out an awful lot of a vibe of this is a bad dog. And of course, especially any trainer who's suggesting the dog be rehomed or whatever is saying, you know, this is a bad dog. And I'm not saying that nobody should ever have that conversation. I'm just saying that that is also a natural part that comes into it. And people got this dog to love it and to enjoy it and whatnot. And we hear so much about either how the dog really has to be whipped into shape and you've got to have so much consistency for
and
this
structure.
dog. Structure. We hear structure all the time. Which
Rules.
What is structure? Like, you know, you sit there and don't do anything.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, that's mostly how we hear about it from the balance side. But we hear a lot of the same from the positive side. But on the positive side, you know, what we hear more of is that all the people have to change. That, well, nobody knows how to greet this dog right, or they let the kids run around and scream in the living room.
That's what they do.
Imagine that, kids doing that, right? I mean, why don't the parents just get rid of the kids so they can keep this dog and be good dog owners, you know, whatever. But just so much criticism of everything. Instead of thinking that there are loving, largely gentle, pet-friendly ways to be happy with the dog and have the dog be happy and have the dog learn how to live in the world as it exists, you know? Not having to be, you know, baby gated off from people all the time, not having to be in a world where no food exists because how can you expect the dog not to get on the table or the counter or whatever else. But I really think about that these people have almost always had other dogs and not had problems or anything like this. So how would it be possible that they are all of a sudden the whole problem, you know?
And also, at their core, very few dogs are really bad dogs. I mean, at the time that you might meet them, they might be really annoying or really
they can have really bad behavior. They can be really stressed. They can be really comfortable using aggression as a response to things.
Sure, but by the time we're done with them, they are really lovely dogs, and I would say that there aren't any that I don't really enjoy by the time we're done.
Well,
or even midway through the process, to be honest.
Absolutely, you know, and I hate to, well, you know, like one of the things we hear a lot of is trainers talking about the dog as just a brat, or, you know, I mean, a million different terms they use for it. Well, what is a brat? just, you know, a kid who hasn't learned how to behave well yet.
Right.
And of course, that's sort of what those trainers feel like, but they feel like the way to get there is you got to crack the whip and deprivilege the heck out of this animal and whatnot. You know, I'm trying to think if there's been a time in the last 5 years that I've told somebody, regardless of their dog's problem, that your dog cannot get on the furniture, cannot sleep in your bed, etc., etc. Now, there are times where I'll say, your dog can't sleep in the bed right now because you have to deal with some of its issues on an easier level. But if you like sleeping in the bed with your dog, or your dog sleeping in the bed with you, our goal is to get back to where you can all do that and everybody can be happy and,
Right.
and be good. And, you know, we don't go through some kind of concentration camp exercise to get there, you know. But anyway, I think, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just one thought about why also one could be a third or fourth trainer, and that is often that the training that they've done before hasn't resonated with them because of those very reasons, because that trainer has said, okay, well, you have to withhold affection, you have to manage them at all times, you have to, you know, it takes the joy out of owning a dog.
Well, that's true, but you know, I don't usually find that the people have had that kind of a trainer or a purely positive trainer or whatever and rejected that training because it didn't mesh with them. I usually find if they're the kind of person that's going to get to a third and fourth trainer, that they actually really tried to do that stuff and it didn't work.
Right.
It may certainly be in part be it was hard for them to be fully compliant because some of the difficulties or impracticalities of what was being said. But I think this is part of the attitude that the trainers tend to have. Well, these people just didn't try hard enough. And, you know, if that were the case, then they wouldn't try hard enough with the stuff I teach them. Why would it be any different all of a sudden,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So if all of a sudden I can come in, or other TBT trainers that we've taught can come in and be that, you know, second, third, fourth trainer, and all of a sudden we've got really good compliance, the people are super happy with the changes dogs are making and stuff, it can't be them.
Right.
It's got to be the training that's being shared with them and whatnot. So yeah, I don't even think, I mean, you do certainly get some people who say, I had this trainer in, they were very far to whatever we call the left or the right, but you know, very far to one side or the other.
Yeah.
And I couldn't relate to that and whatnot. But still, those people usually, that's one of the first 2 or 3 trainers they've been through, you know. And I mean, it is just, I mean, let me just say, people who call you and you're the third or fourth trainer they've called, they are great clients. I mean, they've already spent a boatload of money that didn't fix anything, and they haven't gotten rid of the dog yet, and they're still working to help the dog. They're still willing to spend money. They're still willing to do other stuff.
Yeah.
Those are great clients, you know.
Yeah.
So it just makes me really upset hearing that. But the other thing I think that's really important to think about is if we're talking about significant behaviors, you know, like separation anxiety, aggression, resource guarding, pronounced fear, real hyperactivity, and a lot of hyperactivity in young dogs ends up being a problem with biting and mouthing and, you know, that kind of stuff. So stuff that is not just inconvenient. You know, you got little kids and then the dog's, you know, chomping on them to play with them just out of exuberance and whatnot. It's a real problem. But, you know, any of these kind of things, they would exist if we took that dog and stuck it in another home.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's, you know, I walk in and the dog's doing it to me.
Right.
You know, he doesn't
So
go.
it's not your energy.
He doesn't go, oops, God walked in, and you know, I'm going to stop that right now.
So it's
you know,
not your energy like that changes everything when you walk in.
No. And you know, I think the thing that's really important to think about that is, it is absolutely true that the people have not yet become a part of the solution for the dog. That's our job, is to teach them how. They don't know how to do it. But that doesn't mean that we should be beating up on them and telling them they're the problem. And I'll tell you, I mean, I have clients that we're into the 3rd and 4th session, and I'm still trying to talk them down from the idea that they are the source of the problems, and et cetera, et cetera. And it just, I mean, it breaks my heart. I have a woman right now with this big Aussie who is a really cool dog, handsome as hell, naturally very nervy and whatnot, shocking, and just barks at everything like he's going to kill it, but doesn't, and responding really, really well to training. But we're in the third session, and she's still talking about how I know I'm his problem. As she's doing things that are solving his problem, I'm like, look what you just did. You just changed him from doing what he used to do to something else, like in no time at all.
Right.
And it's funny too, because I showed up on the third session. Dog barked at me just a little bit. She did what I normally told him to do, which is just praise the dog, just tell him he's a good dog, which seems crazy while the dog's doing exactly what you don't want. But because we've associated that with rewards, he basically immediately became calm, came running over to me to check me out. Through all the first part of this, I was hidden from him by my car, so he couldn't see who it was. And so she's telling me about how awful she is, and she's the dog's problem and everything. And she, by the way, has 5 other dogs in the house that are
Perfectly fine.
well, they're good.
Yeah.
They're very good, you know. And not naturally easy dogs. 3 of them are German Shepherds. I forget what the heck the other 1 or 2 are, but anyway, I'm telling her about everything she did that was good, and she said to me, well, but that's because he knows you now. I said, oh, you mean because this is my 3rd time here? And she says, yeah. And she's got this really nice young guy who does her horse stalls for her and does some other stuff around the little small farm she's got. And he's been working there for a year. The dog's a 1.5 years old.
And he's been desperate to touch this dog.
He's been dying to touch the dog. I mean, he just really wants to be buddies with the dog, but has not pushed himself on the dog, has totally respected the dog, and the dog just barks his butt off at him. If he sees him, he'll go running to him and bark and carry on at him from, 10, 15, 20 feet away. And the guy doesn't get nasty with him. He doesn't try to convince him he should be friends, but he just always says to the owner, I really wish I could pet him one day. Our second appointment, the dog went up and touched the guy. And I told him, I said, don't try to touch the dog no matter what it does, right? Dog's off leash. We haven't done any obedience. There's no, magical go be friends command I've taught the dog and whatnot. We're just teaching the dog how to be calmer and how to feel better about things, using intermediate and terminal bridges for pro-social behavior and whatnot. And the dog goes up to him, and he just starts saying to the owner, Mrs. So-and-so, Mrs. So, did you see that? Did you see that? So I said to her, how is it possible that it wasn't you who helped him to be good right there? You're saying it's because he's seeing me for the 3rd time. He couldn't even see me by the time he became good.
Right.
And your barn help has been coming 3 times a week.
For a year.
For a year. The dog's a 1.5 years old, right? And that hasn't changed, so how could that be?
Right.
So what if somebody else had shared this idea with her or this way of being with the dog? Then she would have been on her first trainer and she would have been having success then.
Yeah.
The dog's a 1 year old, and she has had, I think I'm the 3rd trainer. I know I'm at least the 3rd trainer. I might be the 4th. And she's had so many family members tell her it's her fault, she doesn't deal with the dog properly, and et cetera, et cetera. And in a couple weeks, everything's changing for the dog. And one of her huge goals is her family owns their own business. She wants to take the dog to work and have it in her office with her. But everyone who goes by the office or anything that moves anywhere else, he goes into big alarm barking and everything else. And I'm sure in a couple of weeks we're going to have that dog in the office with her. And it's because she's a great freaking owner. And she's been a great owner all along. She just hasn't been given good information.
Yeah.
So that's kind of crazy. So another thought, though, that relates to this is so many of the dogs we deal with nowadays are rescue dogs. And, people get criticized because they didn't socialize the dog enough, etc., etc., aside from all the BS about socialization and whatnot, and that not being done enough. Wasn't their choice. They were kind enough to go someplace, see an animal in need, think that if they just loved it enough, it would be better than it is, where it's at, or never got told what the heck it does, what's going on with it. That happens a lot, right?
Right.
Because being in rescue, you've seen tons of that. But so they've put all this love out in the world, and they're trying to do something good, and they are taking in damaged goods. Very commonly, almost all of these dogs have some genetic predisposition to the problem behavior they have. A lot of them, it's really almost exclusively genetics. There's nobody that would just magically raise these dogs and they'd be perfect. I could raise them and they'd be very, very good, or we wouldn't be able to fix them.
Yes.
But the point is, I would do a lot of very specific things
Yeah.
to do that, and probably not the things that these trainers are telling them to do.
So the other thing that amuses me is that if these owners were such amazing trainers at making their dogs so horrible,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know,
How could I overcome that, right? Yeah, it's crazy. And the other thing that we always get told, and it's interesting because the purely positive people like to project this onto Cesar Millan as him being unique in this way. And I'm neither a Cesar fan nor a Cesar hater. I definitely don't train the way he does. But I get frustrated at Cesar saying, you just have to be this certain way, you have to feel this certain way. But we hear the same thing from people on the other side of the spectrum all the time, from purely positive trainers. And you were talking the other day about a situation we had with somebody up in Pennsylvania who had been having really big problems with their Rottie mixed dog, had a lot of aggression issues, and everybody kept telling the person that she had to be calmer and she had to have better energy. And I guess over, I don't know what it was, 2 or 3 years, that wasn't working for her. And we did some work with it at a workshop, and all that changed. So tell them about that, because that was funny. Remember the woman that all of a sudden said, oh, the reason the dog was better this time.
Right, it's because your energy was different.
So the trainer who had been
working with the dog
him
for
a
a
long
few
time
years.
said, the reason,
Well, that's really the gist of it, was that we did some really cool perception modification with the dog and helped it relax and calm down, and it did great. And it wasn't about the woman's energy. First off, the woman can't change who she is.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's about, at least what we talk about in TBTE, is it's about the process. It's the process of doing what we do. That's what makes the changes.
Yeah. Well, so I think a couple things about that. First of all, some people are just anxious people. They are significantly lacking in confidence and whatnot. And those are going to be really difficult matchups for some dogs.
Sure.
Right? There's some dogs that's not the ideal matchup for. But if that's the matchup and that's the person who loves the dog and is taking care of it and is willing to spend money on it and everything else, that's the best person to work with, because there's not necessarily anybody else lining up to help.
No.
But what I thought was interesting was that the trainer made it very clear that I was in danger working with the dog. So we put some controls in place to help with that. And we're told that probably wasn't secure enough. But I felt comfortable with it. So I was like, well, let's go ahead and do this. I trust that I'm secure enough with what's going on. I'm not being naive. And the other trainer did a great job of helping. That was really nice, and all that. But yeah, the dog changed tremendously, and yes, the person became calmer. Someone is not crazy for being anxious and nervous that their dog, who has tried to hurt people before, might hurt somebody.
Absolutely. If you know what your dog is capable of, you are going to be anxious and nervous.
And to say, well, if you would just be calm, everything would be good. First of all, it's a balled out lie.
Right.
This is not true. The dog had the problems first. But, even if, it would help some, it's not going to make all the difference in the world.
Right.
And you're asking for a very impractical thing. Don't worry about the fact that your dog might bite me. Just be calm and relaxed. That will make this all safer. That puts more stress on the person. It's like, Jesus, now I really am not just responsible for what happens if my dog bites, but I'm personally responsible in my own way of being for whether he does or doesn't do it. I mean, it was just crazy. So what I thought was funny was that when we were all done, the trainer said to the owner, see, the reason he did so much better this time was because you were calmer.
Yeah.
She didn't start out calm at all in the beginning.
No.
She became calmer as the work progressed, and the dog became calmer.
Yeah.
And she's starting to see, okay, my dog is feeling different and acting differently now. So that was such a cart before the horse kind of thing. But to me, this is just another aspect of potentially being really unfair to people, and not recognizing we're there to help the dog and we're there to help the people. We can share with people ways that they can focus on doing certain things that will help them to emotionally feel better. But just saying, just feel better and everything will be good, actually makes them feel worse because it puts more stress on them. It's more onus.
Yeah.
And people, they don't know how to do that. And we see all the time people becoming calmer and happier and all that. But anyway, so we're there to help everybody. And
and we're thrilled to do it.
yeah, and I would just love to see the professional trainers of the world, whatever basis they come from, just being a whole lot kinder and gentler and more supportive to the owners. You know, we have a lot of people who want to be purely positive with the dogs and nothing like that with the owners. And at least you got to say, for some of the balanced people who are hard on the dogs, you know, well, they're hard on the owners too. It's a fair game. But I don't know. But really, we're really there to help these people, and their dog is such a core part of their emotional life.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing they need is somebody else coming in, beating up on them and making them feel badly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. Bye.